Welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha, a podcast shared by David Roylance. This podcast is dedicated to guiding you to completely eliminate the discontent mind and the suffering it causes by attaining enlightenment. Learn and practice the teachings of Gotama Buddha that will guide you to fully attain a peaceful, calm, serene, and content mind with joy. To support this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha or visit buddhadailywisdom.com, where you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online learning resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Now, here's our teacher to share more.
Sawadee Kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our group learning program, and we're studying Volume 1, Chapter 7, which is titled The Five Precepts, a Householder's Guide to Daily Practice. This is where you're going to learn about 5 impactful decisions that you can make either wisely, which will produce wholesome results for you, or unwisely, and it will produce unwholesome results for you. Oftentimes people have been taught that the Buddha shared there's no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants. This isn't what the Buddha actually taught on this topic. He used much more illuminating language related to these particular teachings, and I'm going to share with you his original words of what he actually shared with the 5 precepts, and then I'm going to show you how to relate it to your day-to-day experiences that you have on a day-to-day basis. What you're going to see is that the Buddha is teaching you about these natural laws and helping you to be able to eliminate the pollutions of the mind of craving, anger, and ignorance by learning these teachings and then practicing them. Of course, we're going to start with meditation first, but then afterwards, we'll move into this talk about the 5 precepts. So I'd like to welcome all of you, whether you're joining for the first time or you're joining regularly, and at the same time invite you to join for our meditation. I'm going to start with some chanting to ease us into the meditation. Then I'm going to come in with some guidance. There's going to be a period of time where it's just quiet and we're all meditating together. Then we'll come out of the meditation with some more chanting. And then that's where I'll start today's class. So if you'd like to join for meditation, you might pull up a meditation cushion or a chair or a sofa or anything like this. And you're welcome to chant along if you like, and then I'll come back in with some guidance. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakawa Bhutang Mahakavanang Apivateyami Savakato Mahakavata Tammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Mahakavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Saṅghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Mahakawa Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakato Rokawitu anuttero purisa dhamma sati satatava manusana Poto Bhagavati. Okay, with the lower body and hands and arms comfortable, and the upper body erect. Just close the eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Here you're just looking to establish the breath. A nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. Not forced or controlled, just a gradual inhale through the nose, experiencing the full breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Your breath may not match up with the guidance that I'm providing, and that's okay. This is your practice. I'm just here for guidance. You can use this voice as a reminder that whenever you get to the next inhale, breathing gradually through the nose, developing a nice, natural, steady, consistent breath. And then whenever you're ready, exhale out through the nose, experiencing the full breath. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the breath well established, start fixating the mind on the breath, either the sound of the breath coming into the nose or the sensation of air moving over the skin into the nose. The breath is the present moment. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. With the mind fixated on the breath, whenever you notice that the mind moves off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. No need to observe the thought, label it, judge it, analyze it, or even try to figure out where it's coming from. Whenever you notice that the mind is moved off the breath, cut that off, let it go, and come back to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to be quiet now and let you do this work of focusing on the breath, cutting off and letting go anytime the mind moves off the breath. You have nowhere to go, There's nothing to do. No one needs you right now. This is your time to focus on the breath. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธภะคะวาพุทธังมหากัมวันนังอะภิวาเทมิ สวากขาโตมหาควตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาควโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิจาจารนังสัมมุโนสกาโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรปุริสานามาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภะคะวะติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation. Once again, welcome to all of you guys. Welcome to our class today. It's nice to see all of you guys here. I'm going to be sharing with you guys the 5 precepts today, helping you guys to understand what the Buddha taught on this important topic. The 5 precepts actually plug into the Eightfold Path, which is what we studied 2 weeks ago. What you're going to be learning here with the 5 precepts are 5 impactful decisions that you could make either wisely or unwisely, and it's going to produce either wholesome results or wholesome Kamma, or unwholesome results or unwholesome Kamma. Oftentimes people say that the Buddha taught no killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, and no intoxicants. And if this is what you've heard about the 5 precepts, this isn't actually what the Buddha taught. This sounds like a bunch of rules or commandments. It sounds like it's black or white. It doesn't really give you any real information to be able to help you to understand what it is that he's teaching you and why he's teaching it and how to actually move forward with applying it to your day-to-day life. So I'm going to help you through using the original words of the Buddha to understand what he's teaching you here related to the 5 precepts and how to apply that into your day-to-day life. Whenever you're learning moral conduct from the teaching of the Buddha, it's helpful to understand that what he's actually teaching you is the natural law of Kamma. All of his teachings can be described as the natural laws of existence. He's helping you to understand these natural laws and how to make wise decisions so that you can experience only wholesome results in your life. Because if you walk down the beach and you kicked up sand and it blew sand back in your face, you would realize like, oh, that's unwise. I shouldn't do that. The wind's blowing and I don't like having sand being blown into my face. So this natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect or action and result, it's affecting us whether we're aware of it or not. Just like the natural law of gravity and all the other things that you experience in day-to-day life, that this natural law is functioning and affecting you, whether you're aware of it or not. And because the mind in the unenlightened state lacks wisdom of this natural law, it will tend to make unwise decisions that lead to unwholesome results. And then when those things are happening, we might oftentimes, even with our lack of wisdom, blame the things that we're experiencing on other people. We think that maybe it's good luck or bad luck or destiny or fate, or maybe it's other people that have us experience these things in our day-to-day life. But what you come to understand with the natural law of Kamma, and we're going to be talking about this all throughout your journey with the path to enlightenment and more in detail when we get to chapter 9, is that the natural law of Kamma is showing you where you're making wise decisions and unwise decisions. Now, some people refer to this as karma. You might have heard that before. People are usually more familiar with that, and that's the Sanskrit language. It's just a different language referring to the same natural law. But the original teachings of the Buddha are in the Pali language. So people who study the original teachings of the Buddha will tend to use the word Kamma because that's the word that's used there. If this translated to just one English word, I would use that because it's much easier for everyone to just speak English, but it doesn't translate to just one English word. So I still need to use this word Kamma. And what it's referring to is this natural law of cause and effect, or action and result, essentially a sequence of events. It's the results of your decisions, that when you make any certain decision, it's going to produce a certain result, either wholesome Kamma or unwholesome Kamma, or wholesome results or unwholesome results. There's no being who's overseeing this. It's nothing mystical or magical. It's not about punishments and rewards or even about who's to blame or who's at fault. It's just showing you a sequence of events of how things occur in the world. And that's what the Buddha is teaching you, is this natural law. He's not explaining to you the way the world should be. He's explaining to you the way the world is. And you've experienced life enough that when you study his teachings, you can actually learn them and investigate them. You can examine them. And then you can reflect on them through your own direct experiences and things that you've experienced in life to be able to independently verify that his teachings are true. And then you can start moving his teachings into practice where you're actually making decisions in line with the natural laws, and you will see that your life just drastically improves and the condition of your mind improves because it's your life, it's your decisions, and it's your results. So if we resign ourselves to the thinking that what we experience in life is good luck or bad luck or destiny or fate, or it's other people who's causing these things in our life, then we're basically locked in. We can't do anything to improve what we experience in life. But if you start to understand the natural law of Kamma, which is the truth and the way things are actually really truly working, then if there's anything that you don't particularly care for in your life and the way things are happening in your life, all you need to do is cultivate wisdom, make different decisions, and then you will experience different results. But if it's good luck, bad luck, destiny, or fate, or if it's other people that's causing these things to occur, you have no ability to change any of that stuff. So that's why learning the natural law of Kamma is actually so empowering, to be able to see that, hey, I can just cultivate wisdom, make different decisions, and I can experience different results. And that's what the teachings of the Buddha are here for you. So as we go in today's class, I'm going to be pausing at different times and opening up for any questions that you guys have on the things that I'm discussing and sharing with you guys. You can put your questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, and I'll be able to see that and I'll answer any questions that you have. Or you can, in Zoom, raise your hand electronically, unmute your microphone, and then we'll be able to hear you and I'll be able to answer your questions for you. So this first precept that the Buddha teaches, these are his words. He shares abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. So as you guys have learned in this program before, you're not interested in believing any of these teachings, because with belief, you don't know what's true or false. You need to really investigate and examine his teachings. So whenever you see a teaching like this, you should look at it and penetrate into it and examine it. And when you look at this teaching, you can see that he's talking about living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So one of the first things you might ask yourself in examination of his teachings is, well, what's a living being? How do we determine what is a living being? Let's not even assume that we actually know what the definition of a living being is, because if you haven't actually studied this, then you don't necessarily know what a living being is, because there's so many different beings in the world, you need to be able to discern what is or is not a living being. Because whenever you're causing harm to a living being, this harm is going to come back to you. So the Buddha teaches a teaching called the five aggregates. You might also think about this as the five collections or the five elements or the five criteria. These five criteria determine what is or is not a living being. And this definition that he shares has held up for 2,500 years. So I'll introduce you to the five aggregates and helping you to be able to understand what a living being is so that then you can apply these teachings in this situation. So the five aggregates or the five criteria that determine what is or is not a living being is that a living being is going to have physical form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and a consciousness. I'm going to explain to you what these things are, but remember, you're not believing me. You can actually relate to this and you can reflect on this because you know that you're a living being. And as I go through these five aggregates, you can check them off and be like, yep, have that one, have that one, have that one. And you can independently verify that these teachings are true. So what physical form is that's the physical body, that a living being is going to have physical form, an actual body, flesh and tissue and things like this. That's the physical form. Then the second one is feelings. This is pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. These are conditioned feelings that we talk about. So a living being is going to experience feelings. A living being is going to have perceptions. What perceptions are your views and opinions about the world that may or may not even be true, but this is how you look out at the world, your certain views and opinions. Then there's volitional formations. What those are choices and decisions, that a living being is going to essentially have free will. They're going to be able to make their own choices. So that's what a volitional formation is that there's a choice or decisions that this individual being is making. Then the consciousness is the actual mind. So a living being is going to have a mind or a consciousness. So this is form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, which are choices or decisions, and then there's a consciousness or the mind. So you can see that you have these five aggregates: a squirrel, a ant, a bird, a dog, a lion, a tiger. All these beings are living beings, and we know that, and they meet the criteria of the five aggregates. But then, because you're interested in fully penetrating this and making sure that you see the truth, you would like to take an object that you know is not a living being and make sure that it doesn't meet the criteria of the five aggregates to doubly verify whether this is actually true or not. So maybe this electronic device that you're listening to this on, or for me, I'm sitting in a chair or sitting at this desk. You can take any of these kinds of things because we know they're not living beings, and let's just contrast it with the five aggregates and see if these are actually living beings. So ask yourself, does that electronic device that you have, does it have physical form? Well, the answer is yes, it has physical form. Does it have feelings? Does it get angry or sad or frustrated or grumpy or irritable? No, it doesn't do that, right? Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? Does it look out the world and have those certain views and opinions? No, it doesn't have that. Does it make choices or decisions, volitional formations? It doesn't do that because it can't do anything without human involvement. A human is actually involved in making the choices and decisions and inputting that into the electronic device. And then does this electronic device have a consciousness or a mind? And it doesn't. So you can see that that is not a living being. So this is how you can independently verify the teachings of the Buddha, is through your own direct experience and reflecting on that based on what you experience in life. So this is what an individual needs to learn in order to understand the natural laws as it relates to a living being. And this is something that I usually teach students as they move forward in the program with me and they learn different things. But here you can kind of get introduced to it and you can understand it to a certain degree perhaps. But in the meantime, if you're having challenges understanding the five aggregates, which you can penetrate into more to make sure you fully understand if you like, or what you can also do is you can use this kind of shorthand way of figuring out what is a living being and what isn't a living being. But the only challenge is that this way doesn't actually work in all situations, because the Buddha describes through the five aggregates exactly how to determine a living being. But you can also look at it in this way, that a living being is going to have originated from an egg, a sperm, and it's going to have a consciousness. This isn't true in all situations. There are living beings that you can see that they are living beings as it relates to the five aggregates, but they didn't originate from an egg or a sperm. You can see that, but they do have a consciousness, of course. So while this can be a way to kind of help you get started, to really be able to penetrate into understanding what is or isn't a living being, you're going to need to know the five aggregates. And I teach you that in volume 2 of the book series. That's something that you learn right when you start volume 2. So when we understand the five aggregates and how to determine a living being, then we can understand that plants and bacteria and viruses and things like this, these aren't actual living beings. And one of the challenges is that we use language in the unenlightened state with our lack of wisdom in ways that doesn't necessarily represent the truth. We might say like, oh, I'm going to take that antibiotic and kill this bacteria, or I need to kill this virus to get rid of this sickness in the body, or, don't kill that tree, or, you killed that plant, right? But you can't kill these things because they're not actually living beings. What we're really doing is we're harvesting a plant, or we're eliminating a bacteria, or we're eliminating a virus. We're not actually killing these things because they're not actually living beings. So you might find that as you learn more and more of the truth and you gain more and more wisdom, that you start changing your vocabulary as you start thinking about these things in different ways. So I would never talk about, at this point in my life, about killing a plant because I know that it's not a living being and it's not possible to kill it. And you can see this to be the truth, not only through the five aggregates, that these things aren't living beings, but you can see it through the natural law of Kamma. Because whenever you cause harm to a living being, this harm is going to come back to you. And you're going to see this unwholesome results or this unwholesome Kamma. But when we eliminate a bacteria from the body, we actually experience wholesome results because we get healthy. When the bacteria is there, the body is unhealthy, but when we take some kind of medicine or otherwise eradicate this bacteria from the body, we experience wholesome results. If the bacteria was a living being, when we eradicated it, we would experience unwholesome results. So one of the things we learned about plants is that if we're going to harvest a tree, that it's wise to plant 5 or 10 different trees. Because at one time we were harvesting without actually planting, and that produced unwholesome results. But it wasn't the harvesting of the plant that was the problem. It was the not choosing to plant new plants. That was the problem. So we remedied that by now what people have learned is if we're going to harvest one tree, let's plant 5 or 10 more. Right? And now when we do that, we can see that we don't experience any unwholesome results when we harvest this broccoli or this tree. We experience wholesome results. So you can see through the 5 aggregates that these things aren't living beings, and through the natural law of Kamma as well. So now that you are starting to understand what a living being is, now let's talk about compassion. We're going to be discussing this when we get to chapter 14, but we can kind of talk about it here for a moment. What compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. That's what the Buddha is teaching you here, is to live with compassion, the concern for the misfortune of other beings. So living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So if you're doing that, then you're going to need to ask yourself, would you participate in things like euthanasia of a human or animal, termination of a pregnancy, suicide, assisted suicide, capital punishment, war, government-sponsored killings, or murder? These are all intentional killings, and you're going to need to ask yourself whether or not you would participate in these. Because I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do. That's not my role. My role is to help you be able to see the natural law of Kamma, and then you make the decisions that's best for you. And you could take these examples here and you could apply them in life, and you could see maybe in some situations it would be wise to do some of these things, and maybe in other situations it wouldn't be so wise. So I'm going to take some of these as examples and kind of show you how I can't give you a decision tree that says, if this happens, do that, or if this happens, do this, because that would be like a permanent answer for every situation. Every situation you're in has unique variables, and only you know those unique variables 100% because you're in that situation. And that's why it's not my job to tell you how you should lead your life and what decisions you should make. It's my role to help you understand the natural law of Kamma, and then slowly but surely you can learn that and then make decisions that are in your own best interest. And wherever you're struggling with that, you can come to me and ask for help. And I will share with you certain ideas, certain thoughts, certain things to think about related to this natural law, but I'm never going to make a decision for you or tell you what you should or shouldn't be doing. That's up to you to decide. So I usually explain to people, if you do it this way, this is what you'll experience. If you do it that way, this is what you'll experience. And then ultimately, the decision is up to you to make. So let's take a couple of these where you can see that moving to this higher consciousness and applying these precepts is not just plug and play. It's not a decision tree, and it's not black and white. You need to be able to think through what it is that you're experiencing and then apply these precepts in those given situations. So something like termination of a pregnancy. This is a good one to start with and start talking about. Now, some people think of this as a political discussion, and I don't think of it that way because it's not about politics. It's a medical technology that has been invented, and in some situations it can be used successfully and in a beneficial way, and in other situations it could be used in a harmful way. It really just depends on how the decisions are being made and how it's being applied. But whether someone chooses to do this or not, it's up to them. It's their choice. Again, it's not up to me to decide. But let's just pretend for a moment that I am a woman, and of course I'm not. So I don't have a womb and I can't get pregnant, but let's just say that I was a female and that I was having a fetus inside the womb. Now, if I had this fetus inside the womb and a doctor shared with me that, hey, this fetus is not going to ever live a viable life outside the womb, and it's threatening your life to be inside the womb, and you could die if you allow this fetus to continue to grow. Well, if I got this information as a female, if I'm going to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, that concern for the misfortune of others needs to start with this being who I am. I can't have loving kindness and compassion for other beings if I'm not practicing that for myself. And if I know that this fetus inside the womb is never going to live a viable life outside the womb, and it's threatening the life of this being who I am, then I would most likely come to the conclusion that I'm going to decide to terminate this pregnancy. And that would be living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings in this situation. And I don't need to feel any guilt or shame or fear or anything like that, because I know that I'm living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. But in another situation, let's just say that I'm regularly having sex with lots of different people and I'm getting pregnant by lots of different people. And maybe now I'm terminating pregnancies regularly as birth control. Maybe 4, 5, 6, 8 different times I've had a termination of a pregnancy. Now in this situation, I'm only doing it for birth control reasons. And now because I've done it so many times, it's going to start to affect the health of this body. We're going to experience certain medical challenges and difficulties because of this, right? So this is where you can see the intention and the decision making is different in these two different situations. The first situation is probably like a once in a lifetime situation, maybe twice at most. The other situation is it's regularly and repeatedly taking the life of this being out of just using it as birth control, so where there's other opportunities that I could have potentially done that, right? So this is just one example, and there's many different variables here, and the right answer is for that individual to decide. It's not up to me to decide that or anybody else. Each individual person needs to have their own free will and make their own choices that they feel comfortable with. But these are things that you can think about as you're potentially making these kinds of decisions. There's other decisions along this area that you might think about. Like, let's talk about war for a bit. There's certain situations where a country could say to their citizens, hey, go over there in that foreign country, attack those people and kill them. And if you kill those people, we're not going to prosecute you for murder. But if you come back here to our country and you kill somebody here, we're going to put you in jail for murder. And the reason why this is occurring is because it's a human law. Right? The humans are deciding that if you kill people over there, we're not going to prosecute you. But if you kill people over here, we're going to prosecute you. And the challenge with human laws is that they're imperfect. They're created and administered and done in certain ways that they're imperfect. They're never going to be perfect because human beings are involved. But the natural law of Kamma is functioning at all times, and it's unbiased. It's going to be functioning perfectly at all times. So even though this particular individual who might be going off to war isn't going to be prosecuted for murder in their home country, they are going to experience the results of their decisions. They can't escape the natural law of Kamma. And this is why if you go off to war, you're very likely to get injured. You could have brain injuries. You could have mental challenges. You can get addicted to substances. You can get amputations. You can get killed yourself. You could potentially come back home, find it very difficult to reintegrate into society, find housing and find a job. These are all the results of my decisions to potentially go off into a war and actually fight in this particular war and kill individuals. So the human laws are imperfect. So what you're looking to do is gain insight into this natural law of Kamma, which is functioning at a much higher level. There's even other situations, like sometimes students ask me about infestations of bugs and insects in their home. And we actually had one of those here several years ago where termites were invading our home and they were eating our home. And we needed to figure out what to do here. So what we did is we lived compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. The first thing we did is we started looking on the internet to see if there was a way to eradicate these beings without killing them. And this was our compassion, that we had concern for these beings and we were looking for a way to eliminate them. But at the end of the day, what we came back with is that there was no way to eliminate them without killing them. So in order to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, starting with us, if we were to allow these insects to continue to eat our home, then we wouldn't have a place to live because we can't buy another home. We wouldn't have a shelter, and it would be very difficult for us to live without a shelter. So to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, my wife called somebody to come and put down food, and then they ate this food and took it back to their nest. And over a number of years, it took care of this issue. So in this situation, these insects were experiencing their Kamma. That these insects, because they're in the animal world, they don't have the same level of consciousness as a human being. If we ate wood, and that was something that we needed to sustain our life, we know that we should go out into the forest where it's not going to cause any harm to anybody, and we would eat those trees, and we would eat that wood. But the animals, the insects of termites, they don't have that level of consciousness. They don't realize they're actually causing harm, but they are. And now this harm that they're causing and inflicting, now there's this harm that's coming to them. They're experiencing the results of their decisions. And now they will experience rebirth into whatever realm they're going to experience with more and more potential to be able to get to enlightenment. So you're going to run across these different situations at different times. And depending on how much you reflect on this and you look at it, you might be able to make decisions about any given situation that you're having. But where you have difficulties with that, you can always reach out to me in all the different methods that you have available to you to be able to get help. You can post in our Facebook group, you can ask questions in live classes, you can send me a private message, or you can schedule personal guidance, and I will help you not only with this teaching, but any other teachings that you need to figure out how to apply to your day-to-day life. Some of the questions that students have asked me over the years that I've just included into the book and into our talk about this particular topic are things like a do not resuscitate or a DNR. This is something that some people put in place while they're still alive. It's a legal document that informs their living relatives that if this body dies, don't use medical technology to bring it back to life. And people ask me, is this practicing this precept? And the answer is yes, because you haven't actually killed anybody in this situation. All you've done is you've made a legal document that says you're comfortable with death, that if this body dies, don't bring it back to life. You haven't actually intentionally killed anything in this situation. So if you have one of these, then you are living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. You're just saying, hey, I'm comfortable with death. No need to bring me back to life. Then sometimes people ask me about defense and protection, that if somebody broke into your house at like 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, what should you do? And one of the things I do is I joke with people and I say, you know what? That person who's coming to your house at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning and breaking in the window, they're not bringing you chocolate and flowers. You can be sure of that, right? So this person is there to cause harm, and they're wanting to cause harm in some way. They're either going to cause harm physically to you or to your material possessions, or they're there to steal something, or something's happening, right? So what I suggest for people to do is, if possible, just get out of the house. That's the best thing to do, because if this person would like to steal something, if they would like to damage something, so be it. Go somewhere else, call the police. They have the tools, the equipment, and the training to take care of the situation. You just get to safety. That's the best situation. But these teachings aren't black and white, because there's going to be multiple variables involved. You might look out your window and there's a gang of 20 people outside your house. You might not be able to leave out of your house. So that's where you've got to be able to stay calm and make wise decisions in any given situation. So if you're backed up into the corner and this individual's there stabbing you with a knife or hitting you with their fist, or threatening to kill you or rape you or something like this, my advice to you would be to defend this being. Is if you need to cause harm to this being in order to stop the harm coming to you, this is completely going to be helpful for you. It's going to produce wholesome results, because this person is trying to inflict harm, and now this harm is coming to them. You're not going out into the world with craving and anger and ignorance and trying to inflict harm on people because you have a craving to harm people. You're just offending this being and maybe other beings in your home. And it wouldn't be living compassionately to sit there and let this person just keep stabbing you or rape you or kill you or any other thing, right? So cause as least amount of harm as possible as you can, and then try to make this stop, right? If you can. That would be the best thing to do in that situation. So don't feel like you need to just sit there and take whatever is coming to you, because that wouldn't be living compassionately necessarily for all living beings. Sometimes people ask me about eating plant-based food, like becoming vegan, and they ask, how does that factor into a precept like this? One of the things that you're going to notice is that if you do move to a plant-based food supply, you're going to notice improved health with the body and with the mind as well. Because when you're eating the flesh of an animal, you have contributed to the death of this being. And it's not just the person who killed the being that is experiencing the harm. It's the person who's ingesting the meat as well. When you ingest this animal flesh, you're not just ingesting the animal flesh, but there's certain drugs and hormones and toxins in this meat. And when you eat it, it's affecting the health of the body. You can see this through research, but you can also practice it and see it for yourself, that you'll feel more light when you're not eating animal flesh. And the research that they've done is they've taken like wild fish out of places that are supposed to be clean water streams in places like the USA. And they tested the animal flesh, and they found over 90 different substances that shouldn't have been in this animal flesh. And some of the things they found were things like antidepressants and cocaine and things like this. And the way that it got there, they think, is that people were flushing the stuff into the toilet, polluting the water table, and now it was absorbed by the fish in this wild stream. And if you're ingesting that animal flesh, then you're going to be ingesting those drugs, hormones, and toxins, as well as if you're eating meat that's acquired through manufactured farming. They're putting antibiotics and other hormones and growth hormones into their animals because they're trying to grow them really fast in order to get profit. So if you choose to continue to eat meat, that's your choice. That's a choice for you to make. But when or if you ever decide to move to a plant-based food supply, you're going to see improvement to the health of the body and the health of the mind. But whether you choose to do that or not is always a choice for you to make. But you can see the natural law of Kamma here. It's kind of like a person steals a car. If you're driving the car, you're still going to experience the results of that. And it's the same thing here with animal flesh as well. So I'm going to pause here and see what questions you guys have on this particular precept before we move off to the next one. Remember, you can put those questions into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like Paul has a question. So go ahead, sir.
Hi, David. This precept here is a tough one for me. I guess my question is, does this precept have to be followed in order to attain full enlightenment? Like, there's no way around it. Like what I'm saying is that do you have to be vegan to be enlightened, fully enlightened? Do you have to believe, or do you have to be against abortion in its entirety in order to be fully enlightened? Ultimately, yeah, I know you say there's a path you're following, and it'll take time to get to that point. But if you don't ever get to a point where you are fully vegan, will you not be able to attain enlightenment?
Yeah, so what the unenlightened mind tends to do when these things are being taught is they see it as black and white. And I'm not teaching black and white here. I'm showing you the gray area so they can become very clear to you. So I'm not teaching you to believe anything at all. I'm teaching you the natural law of Kamma so that you can be able to see this truth for yourself. So something like termination of a pregnancy, I gave you one example where it could be wise to terminate a pregnancy. And then I gave you another example where it could potentially be unwise. But what you choose to do in that situation is a choice for you to make. And I suspect that you're not going to be in that situation anytime soon, at least for the rest of this life. But if you were, that's a choice for you to make. And what you can see there is that whenever you make a decision, you're going to experience certain results. So you have to come to a decision that's best for you in that situation. And the same thing goes with vegan. Whether someone chooses to be vegan or not, this is a choice for them to make. There's a certain portion of the population that could move over to eating plant-based food supply, and they will see the benefits of having done so, and they will experience the results of those benefits. But there's a certain portion of the population that they've been on meat for so long, and we've been on meat for so many generations, that if they move over to a plant-based food supply, they might be able to do that for a period of time, but they're going to still need to eat some amount of animal products because their body just can't adapt to eating a fully plant-based food supply. So in this situation, the individual isn't just holding on to the animal products out of sensual desire or craving or ill will. They're only choosing to eat these animal products because they are living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, which starts with this being who they are. But you need to be sure that if you're looking at doing something like this, where you're moving to a plant-based food supply, that you actually make a real valid effort to do that at some point, if that's what you would like to be able to do. But when or if you ever choose to do that is a choice for you to make. And when you do these kinds of things, you normally do it gradually. But if you go in that direction and you realize that even through taking supplements or working with doctors and so forth, that this body just can't take a vegan food supply, then you might need to eat 5-10% of meat or other animal products, but you're only doing it out of living compassionately for this living being who you are. So in the next few generations, not everybody's going to be able to move over to a plant-based food supply, but you can still get to enlightenment in this situation because you are living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. You've eliminated craving, anger, and ignorance in this situation. But ultimately, as more and more human beings move to plant-based food, we're going to see that it's going to be easier and easier for humans to do this, because at one time we were all plant-based eaters. But now, over many generations, we've been eating meat and our body has become dependent on that. So as we move over to plant-based food, in a number of generations, we'll be able to get to a point where if people choose, they can be plant-based eaters. But whether you eat animal products or not isn't the determining factor of whether you get to enlightenment. What determines whether you get to enlightenment or not is, have you eliminated the pollutions of mind? And we talk about them from a high level as craving, anger, and ignorance, but in a more detailed level, it's the 10 fetters. So you can eliminate sensual desire and anger and ill will, which are the 2 fetters that are typically involved here. You can eliminate those, but still realize, like, whoa, in order to live compassionately, I'm going to need to eat a little bit of animal products here in order to maintain the health of this particular being and live compassionately for this particular being.
Okay, thanks, David.
You're welcome. If you need more information on that, just let me know, because it sounds like your mind's maybe thinking in a way that I didn't actually teach, and I would like to be sure you get the information that you need.
Well, it's just, to me, I think you've answered the question that you don't absolutely have to follow this precept we'll just use this precept as an example. I know there's 4 more to come, but you don't have to follow this explicitly. It's not an absolute. If you can still, under the right circumstances, you could, I'll give you another example, assistance in death, MAID, known as. My brother-in-law chose MAID just a month ago, but he was diagnosed with ALS and that his death was imminent. He was going to die within 6 to 12 months. No question, his health was deteriorating very rapidly. He was suffering, and his family around him were suffering, and he chose MAID, and now he's passed. And I believe it was good that he had that choice. And he made the choice, very unselfishly. Like he was doing it for the good of his family. And so he could still have attained enlightenment, even though he chose to assistance in death. Because it was for the right reason, or his circumstances, it was still the right decision for his circumstance.
This isn't actually true, Paul. So what you're thinking this precept is, and saying that you don't have to follow this precept absolutely in order to get to enlightenment, is because you're not understanding the precept 100%. You do need to practice this precept, but this precept doesn't involve absolutely being against abortion or absolutely not eating meat and things like this. It's about living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, that you need to cultivate that compassion for all living beings. And then when you're making your decisions about various situations in your life, you're going to make decisions based on that compassion in your mind. So an individual who chooses to have death through means like assisted suicide or suicide, this individual isn't going to get to enlightenment at death, because they have a craving for death. They have a craving for non-existence. So that individual is going to experience rebirth. They wouldn't have been able to get to enlightenment at death because they're still craving in the mind at that point.
Well, you see, that's going to be difficult for me, because I think that what happened there was he made the right decision, and he was doing it compassionately. His decision was not that he craved death, but that he was going to die anyhow, and he would have needed so much, like it would have got to a point where he couldn't feed himself. He would be kept alive through artificial means, and his family around him would just suffer for they had already suffered, a couple of years of this disease, but the disease was progressing to a point where he could no longer live at home. He'd have to go to the hospital or to a clinic, and the people, his family would suffer, and he did this unselfishly. And I'm glad that he had that choice to make in our society, so that but you're saying that by doing so, even for the right reasons, even for compassionate reasons that he made, he could not have attained enlightenment.
What you're describing as right reasons are right reasons based on the way your mind currently thinks, without a full understanding of the natural laws and how the cycle of rebirth works and how the mind works. Whether you think it's right or not isn't a determining factor in any aspect of whether he gets to enlightenment or not. It's all about how the mind's functioning. And if someone's choosing to die and they're choosing death through suicide, there is a craving for non-existence. Their mind is longing and yearning for death. And in this situation, you can't get to enlightenment as long as there's a craving in the mind. And I know that right now that you are saying, like, yes, this person made the right decision. Okay, well, if that was right for them, of course, whatever decision that person made, that is the right decision for them. But in terms of how the natural laws affect an individual who's making any particular decision, whether the decision is right for that person or not, isn't a factor of the natural laws. The natural laws are functioning without bias and regardless of whether somebody thinks it's the right decision or not. So this is something that you're going to need to learn more about and understand more about, and that will help you to be able to see what it is that I'm sharing. But right now, what you're thinking that I'm teaching and what you think that is part of this precept isn't 100% accurate. And that's one of the reasons why you'll struggle with this. So I think the best thing to do is to take our conversation offline, and then you and I can talk about this, and I can help you to be able to understand the things that you're not understanding. And even there, still, you're going to take some time to need to be able to think about this, to be able to see what it is that I'm sharing with you. I'm not sharing with you an opinion or a belief or anything like this. I'm sharing with you what is the natural laws of existence. And the unenlightened mind, with its lack of wisdom of all these natural laws, is going to have a hard time to be able to clearly see what it is that someone's sharing until you take enough time to be able to learn it and then think about it, reflect on it, and things like this. So rather than try to accomplish all of that here in just one class, I think it's better for us to talk offline if that's okay with you.
That's fine. Thank you, David.
Yeah, you're welcome. We have some questions coming in here on YouTube. I'm going to skip to Yi Hung because I'm not sure if this is a gentleman or a man, but I'm not quite sure what you're asking there because there's a lot of stuff that you're saying, but I see Yi Hung's question very clearly. Hello, Teacher David. Are formless beings not living beings? Does it mean living compassionately to all living beings does not apply to formless beings? Thank you. So when we're talking about causing harm to living beings through this particular precept of killing, it applies to form beings like animals and humans. You can't kill a hell being or an afflicted spirit or a heavenly being, and that's why it doesn't apply here. But ultimately, in order to get to enlightenment, you need to have compassion for all beings, which is concern for the misfortune of all beings, right? That's what compassion is. But as it relates to this particular precept, it's the five aggregates that determines a living being. So while a hell being, an afflicted spirit, and heavenly being, they are in existence and you need to have compassion for them, it doesn't relate to this particular precept because you can't actually kill a formless being. Okay, I'm looking to see some other questions here on YouTube. It's a little bit of a challenge because that person, or I'm not sure what your screen name is there, but if you can formulate a question, then I'd be able to help you and answer that for you. Okay, let me see if we have anything on Facebook. Okay, I'm not seeing anything anywhere else. So let's move to the next precept. This is number 2. These are the words of the Buddha. He says, abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given, without stealing. Here, what the Buddha is teaching you to do is, of course, not steal. Because when we steal, when we take from somebody, there's a certain amount of craving in the mind. There's anger, this ill will towards others, and it's all coming from this lack of wisdom or this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality. You can't cause other people to be discontent, but you can cause them harm. So if I stole somebody's car, I'm causing this person harm. They can't go to work to earn money. They can't take their children to school if they have children. They can't go to the store and buy basic necessities to sustain their life. So I've now caused harm to this individual. So it's wise to not steal, because when you cause harm, this harm will come back to you. It's also important to not assume that something can be taken or used, because if I had a college paper, for example, and I showed up to my college classroom and I was about to turn in this paper and I see a stapler on the desk of the professor and the professor's outside, and I just picked up that stapler and started using it, and the professor walks in, they're going to be like, hey, what are you doing? That's my stapler. Right? Because this person maybe is not practicing the teachings, maybe they're attached to their stapler, they're not practicing generosity, and now they get angry and they get frustrated. And they attribute that anger to me, and now maybe I get an F on that paper, maybe I fail, that paper. Maybe I failed the entire class. They're so angry, right? And this is the results of my decisions. So one of the things that the Buddha is teaching you is how to navigate the world with all these unenlightened beings. So if you just went around haphazardly using things and taking things without people's permission, this could actually cause harm. And now you're experiencing harm yourself. But remember, these teachings aren't black and white, right? You need to be able to use your consciousness to think about these situations. If I was outside in my yard and my neighbor got a laceration on their arm from using some yard tool and they were bleeding out, and there's a piece of fabric on my other neighbor's front porch, and I can grab that fabric and put on a tourniquet and stop the bleeding, then I've just saved this person's life, right? And probably once they're in the ambulance and they're headed to the hospital, I'm probably going to go to that other neighbor and say, hey, I'm so sorry. I took your fabric. I would like to make amends here. Can I purchase a fabric and give it to you? Or can I give you some money for that? What can I do to fix this and make amends, right? And this is what you would typically do in these kinds of situations. So each situation is going to be unique, and it's important to never look at these as black and white, that you would need to look at each situation. And generally, you're not interested in assuming that something can be taken or used. And if you need to do that in some rare situation, you would like to make amends for that. Also, you see the Buddha here saying, accept what is given. What he's talking about here is that when somebody offers you a gift, they're practicing generosity. And it's wise for you to accept that gift, because now that is enhancing the quality of that person's mind. So if during the holidays, grandma brings you this sweater that you know that you will absolutely never wear a day in your life, you should accept that sweater. That's what the Buddha is teaching you. But now when you accept that sweater, grandma's mind has just improved because she's practicing generosity. And if you're not going to wear this sweater, then you can give it to someone else, because putting it in the closet and letting it sit there for 20 or 30 years and deteriorate, that's a complete waste of resources. But if you were to shut down grandma's generosity and not accept this is not going to be helpful for grandma, because she's not going to be able to practice generosity to enhance her mind. And now if grandma gets angry or frustrated that you've given it away to somebody else, that's grandma's Kamma. Grandma produced that because she had a craving, she had a desire, she wanted and expected you to wear it, and she hasn't practiced pure generosity in this situation. So you haven't caused grandma's anger if you give it away, because in some cultures they call this regifting, and they think that somehow this is wrong or this is bad. But you haven't caused any harm if someone's giving you a gift and you give it to someone else, because now it might go through 6, 8, 10 different hands, and all of those people were practicing generosity, and that was really, really helpful. But eventually it gets to the 10th person, and this person's like, wow, this is the most beautiful sweater I've ever seen. I'm going to wear this sweater every day, right? So this is what you would like to ultimately be able to do, is accept what is given so that people can enhance the quality of their mind. Because if you're shutting down people's generosity, not only do they not get an opportunity to enhance the quality of their mind, but over time, what you're going to find is people are going to stop practicing generosity with you because they're not interested in doing that. Then notice the Buddha here is saying, awaiting what is given. What this is where if somebody is going on a business trip, let's just say you have like a life partner, somebody like this, and they're headed away on a business trip. If you loaded them up with a bunch of expectations of what you wanted them to bring back for you, this is not awaiting what is given. This is like putting expectations on somebody that they're going to get you something specific. And now when they come back, maybe on their trip, they were like really burdened with trying to find you what you wanted. And then when they come back, maybe they didn't get you everything you wanted. And now maybe you're frustrated or agitated or annoyed. So what the Buddha teaches you is just await what is given. Don't put burden on people to get you the things that you want. But as I mentioned, all of these things, it's not black and white, right? Like accepting what is given, right? As I mentioned, it would be wise to accept what somebody gives you because it's helping them to practice generosity and it's helping that person to enhance the quality of their mind. But if somebody offered you crystal methamphetamine or heroin, are you going to accept what is given? No, you're not going to accept that. So that's where you need to use your higher consciousness in your mind to be able to understand how to practice these teachings in any given situation. They're not black and white. Or awaiting what is given. In general, you're not interested in telling people what you want, But if your partner or some friend or family is going on a trip and they're saying, hey, I'm going back to the USA, is there anything that I can bring you that you might need? Right? In this situation, they're practicing generosity to now get you something from another country or another city. And now if you decide, hey, I would like to see if you could get this thing for me. And if you can't get it, no problem. But if you're able to get it, that would be great. Right? So you need to be able to practice this and not see it as black and white. There's this gray area to be able to understand. And that's what you gain through learning what these teachings are, investigating them, examining them, understanding them, reflecting on them, and then practicing them to be able to see the truth for yourself. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this precept. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, so I'm seeing a question here on YouTube now. A question: do you think in a home it is essential to place the collective well-being central in how to deal with sickness? So everybody needs to be responsible for their own well-being. That's a basic thing that people need to understand. You're not responsible for the well-being of others, but we do contribute to the well-being of others through helping people get food or other resources that they need. But that's an optional thing that we choose to do, but we're not responsible. We're not required to do those things. Those are all personal choices. And when there's sickness, this is just something that is impermanence, right? The body is not going to be permanently healthy. And as long as you don't have a craving to be permanently healthy, or you don't have a craving for other people to be permanently healthy, you can be completely peaceful and joyful, even though you're unhealthy or other people are unhealthy. So this comes through training of the mind and eliminating craving, desire, attachment. Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so we'll move into the third precept. Here again, I'll read this to you and then we'll apply it and help you to be able to see the things that the Buddha is teaching. So he's sharing here abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men who are protected by their mother, father, mother and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner, whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who's been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. So what the Buddha is doing here is he's teaching you how to have sexual conduct that doesn't cause harm. Because whenever you cause harm through your sexual activity, this harm is going to come back to you. So here, I'll just walk you through this. The ones that I have here for you is like where he's talking about those who are protected by their mother, father, brother, sister, or relatives. He's talking about having sex with minors, that this would be unwise to have sex with minors. And the reason why is because this individual is growing and developing in the household. And if they were to have sex really early in life, this is a very impactful thing. And it takes them away from that growth and development that they need to do with their parents and the adults around them. So if you're having sex with an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, something like this is causing harm. In a lot of places, the government laws match to the natural law of Kamma, and we know that it's unwise to have sex with minors. But there actually are some places in the world that it's not illegal to have sex with a minor. And if you look at those kinds of places, you can see that they're being affected by the natural law of Kamma, that those places typically aren't as stable economically, politically. The resources in that country aren't necessarily as strong and vibrant, and you can see that those places are really struggling. And that's because if there's a large number of people having sex so early in their life, their mind doesn't have the opportunity to grow with mom and dad and other caring adults. So the Buddha is teaching how it's unwise to have sex with minors. Also, where you see here that he says, whose violation entails a penalty, what he's talking about there is having sex without consent, like raping somebody, having sex against somebody's will. And in this situation, you would be causing harm, and harm would easily come back to you. Where he's talking about abandoning unchastity, it's helpful to understand what chastity is. During ancient times, there were men who had daughters that would have them outfitted with metal underwear. And this metal underwear had a lock and key on it, and the father was the only one who had the key. And this would be chastity. This is called a chastity belt, meaning you're not having sex with anybody if you have metal underwear on. I can't imagine walking around with those metal underwear, but apparently people actually did that. So that's what chastity is. So the opposite of that, the unchastity, would be having sex with lots of different people. And this would be having sex with multiple partners. And we can see, if you've ever done that, or if you know people that have done that, the harmful things that are occurring and the unwholesome results that we experience. This is where we experience STDs. This is where we might get in fights, we might get in arguments, we might damage each other physically. People have actually been murdered over this kind of thing, or even their car or their home or other material possessions have been damaged. And this is because of the attachment that people have in sexual relationships. And now when people are going out having sex with multiple people, there's a clash between these individuals who are attached to each other. Now there's this anger that arises because the mind is having this attachment based on this relationship. Here, one of the things I share is that there's some cultures where if you have a partner, and maybe you're in your 20s or 30s, and you guys have decided to get married, you might actually go back to mom or dad or grandma and grandpa and say, hey, we're planning to get married, but we would like to live together and we don't have the money to actually buy our own place. Can we live with you for a period of time? And in this situation, the parents have accepted the relationship and they've agreed, yes, you guys can live here. And in this situation, you're not having sex with someone who's protected by their mother, father, and relatives and so forth. This is an acceptance of the relationship. So you can feel comfortable that you're practicing this precept in accordance with what the Buddha is teaching. Here, where the Buddha is saying who are protected by teachings, what he's talking about there is people who have decided to remain celibate, that as you're making your way on the path to enlightenment, in that second stage of enlightenment, individuals will still be able to have sex because there's still central desire in the mind. And oftentimes, depending on where people are in their journey and their path, they might do all this work on the path to enlightenment, make their way up to that second stage of enlightenment, and then kind of hang out there for a while because there your central desire has been diminished, but you still have central desire. And people could potentially still have sex there, and they're still going to have frustration, agitation, and annoyance because in some situations they're going to have sex and they're going to get all these pleasant feelings, but in other situations they're not going to be able to have sex and they're going to be frustrated and agitated and annoyed. And that's because of the craving, desire, attachment for sex. But at some point, people might decide that they would like to move into the third or the fourth stage of enlightenment. And that's where an individual is going to choose to eliminate their sexual contact, because that's one of the very strong central desires that the mind has. You can actually hang out in that second stage of enlightenment for whatever amount of time that you'd like and do all the other work on the path to enlightenment. And you'll have a fairly peaceful life, but you're going to have experiences where you want to have sex and you can't have it, and you're going to be frustrated and agitated or annoyed. But those people who have chosen to move on and they're no longer having sex, if you were to try to lure that person away, that's going to cause harm. Because one of the very best things that could ever happen for an individual or for a community that that individual is part of is for somebody to actually get to enlightenment. For an individual to get to enlightenment, their mind is completely peaceful and joyful. They're experiencing all the benefits of having the focus, concentration, clarity, and deep memory. Their personal, professional relationships are blossoming. They have this deep wisdom to be able to help others, to be able to get to enlightenment, and they're not even in a bad mood anymore. So if we were to try to lure somebody away from their vow of celibacy, it's causing harm to that person, and anybody that that person could potentially help on the path to enlightenment, it's causing harm to them too. So the Buddha teaches you that if somebody has a vow of celibacy, that it would be unwise to try to lure them away from that. And these are the reasons why. In places here like Thailand, they make it really easy for you to know about these kinds of things, that if people are ordained, meaning they're wearing like orange robes, or some people wear red robes, and they shave their hair, they're not supposed to be having sex and they're choosing not to have sex. But also here in Thailand, people who tend to wear white, they're actually not having sex either. And I wear all white. I choose not to have sex. I haven't had sex for many years. I don't wear white because I'm trying to advertise for people to know that I don't have sex. But that's something that some people choose to do, is they wear white because they would like other people to know that they're not having sex. So that way, if you are interested in having sex, you know that you can solicit that from someone who's not wearing all white. So here in Thailand, they make it really easy for these kinds of things. So if you know that somebody's taken a vow of celibacy, the Buddha is teaching you it would be unwise to try to lure them away from that. Sex with people who are committed in other relationships, or sex outside of any relationship that you're committed to, this is also going to cause harm. And this is why we experience sexually transmitted diseases, getting injured, getting beat up. People have gotten murdered. Their personal possessions get destroyed in these situations. So the Buddha is teaching you this natural law of Kamma to be able to see how this is unwise. Or if you were to have sex with people who are human trafficked, this is people who are being forced to have sex against their will, and maybe there's even payment involved. If you go into these situations, this is also unchastity. And in this situation, you can easily get sexually transmitted diseases, you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get robbed, and all these different things can occur. And then also that's paid sexual services, not just in human traffic situations, but also in situations where people are willingly providing sexual services. The same things can happen where you can get sexually transmitted diseases, you can get injured, beat up, murdered, robbed, and all these kinds of things. Notice that in this precept, the Buddha doesn't say anything about same-gender relationships. And the reason why is because there's no harm here. If there's a male and a female choosing to have sex, or if it's a male and a female and female, they're not actually causing any harm because they're a loyal, loving, consenting couple that's choosing to have sex. And that's why the Buddha isn't talking about it here. He was well aware of it during his lifetime because he talks about it in other parts of his teachings, but he doesn't actually teach anything related to it because there's nothing to actually teach. All he was sharing is with his students, he was just making an observation that this is occurring. So if you understand the natural laws of existence, you can fully understand same-gender relationships, that there's never been a time throughout history where all men had sex with women and all women had sex with men, because the universal truth of impermanence tells us that. If there was ever a situation where all men had sex with women and all women had sex with men, that would be permanence. And we understand the universal truth of impermanence. So there's never been a time in the history of humanity where everybody has had sex with the opposite gender. That just doesn't happen. So we can understand this through the natural laws because the Buddha is explaining to you the way the world is. He's not explaining to you the way the world should be. He's explaining the way the world is. And there's some people who are going to choose to have sex with the opposite gender, and there's going to be some who choose to have sex with the same gender. And in this situation, they're not causing harm to anybody because it's a loyal, loving, consenting couple that's choosing to have sex with each other. And this is where you can start seeing how wise this individual, the Buddha, was, or Gotama Buddha was, because 2,500 years ago, he already understood this. There's people today who don't understand this. And with their craving for permanence, wanting every man or woman to have sex with the opposite gender, they get angry if they see something that's opposite of that. And this is coming from that lack of wisdom or the confusion or the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. Then we also see that transgender individuals, we can understand this through the teachings that the Buddha shares, that if you understand that the body is one thing and the mind is something completely different, and now these two things have come together in this existence, that it's understandable through the universal truth of impermanence that not every mind is going to identify in the same way as the sexual organs of the body. If this was the case, then that would be permanence, and the universal truth of impermanence wouldn't exist. But we understand the universal truth of impermanence in that this mind could end up in a body that has sexual organs that is different than how the mind is identifying. So a transgender individual is completely normal and is understandable through the natural laws and the universal truth of impermanence, that this mind coming into the body, it just doesn't identify in the same gender. Because if every mind identified in the same way as the gender of the sexual organs, that would be permanence. But we understand the natural laws, the universal truth of impermanence. And you can also understand the cycle of rebirth, that we've all been different beings many different times in the past. And for this mind that is ending up in a body that has male sexual organs, but the mind identifies as a female, for example, that mind might have been female, 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 female in many different existences. And now that particular mind, having done what it needed to do to be coming into existence again, now finds itself in a body that has male sexual organs. And now this individual identifies as a female because the mind is identifying as a female while the body has male sexual organs. So with the universal truth of impermanence and the cycle of rebirth, we can understand transgender individuals and same-sex partners. It's just completely normal. So that if you are someone who prefers same-gender relationships or you're a transgender individual, this is completely normal. It's been happening since the beginning of time, and we can see this through the natural laws. Sometimes people ask me questions about masturbation and how this factors in to this particular precept. Well, if you understand what you're trying to accomplish on the path to enlightenment, you can understand how masturbation can be helpful in some situations, but in other situations it could potentially be harmful. It all just depends on which direction you're working towards. The ultimate goal is to work towards the elimination of all these pollutions of the mind, and one of the strongest fetters that are in the mind is sensual desire. This is one of the more challenging ones for the mind to eliminate. And one of the strongest sensual desires that the mind has is craving for sex. Not for everybody, because that would be permanence, but a certain portion of the population has a desire for sex. And in that situation, if somebody was maybe listening to this talk and they heard me share how having maybe multiple partners is unwise, maybe someone has like 5 or 10 boyfriends or girlfriends and they realize that this is unwise and they would like to come down to just one partner, right? And in this situation, if they're moving from 10 boyfriends and girlfriends down to one partner, they probably have a pretty high sexual craving, and moving down to one partner can be quite challenging for them. So maybe in the meantime, as they're making this transition, they're using some masturbation in order to be able to help them to get rid of that sensual desire and that sexual cravings as they're bringing their cravings down. And they might use some masturbation to be able to help them with that. Or maybe there's somebody who's interested in going out and raping somebody, and they choose to use some masturbation in this situation instead of going out and causing harm in that way. So in those situations, you can see where masturbation was actually really helpful, because it helped this person come down to one partner, or it helped this person to not go rape somebody. So it's not that masturbation is immoral and you should never do this. It's all about what it is that you're trying to accomplish. And one of the ways that you can think about this is that if you understand anything about dams and the way that they operate dams, is that if you have a large structure that is a dam, these are typically multi-million-dollar projects. And as the water builds up on the dam, it puts more and more pressure on the dam. And if the water comes up too high, they know that it's up too high and it's going to destroy the dam. So one of the things that they do when that pressure of the water comes up is they just open up the dam and they allow the water to flow. And then when the water level drops back down, they will close the dam again in order to protect the dam. Well, this is the same thing that you might experience when you're eliminating something like sexual cravings. As you might notice that you go a period of time without having sex and the pressure is building up in the mind that, gosh, you just really want to have sex. And one of the things that you can do to alleviate that and release the pressure of the dam is to do some masturbation. So in this situation, it can actually be helpful for you. But there's other situations where it could potentially be harmful. That if you were masturbating 10, 15, 20, 25 times a day, this is excessive and it's increasing your sensual desire. And it's causing harm to this being, who you are. So it really depends on which direction your sensual desire is going, of whether or not masturbation is actually causing harm or not. So this is something that you're going to need to look at if you're choosing to do that. Sex with animals is one of the few things that is actually very black and white. That a animal can't give us consent to have sex with it. And I imagine if somebody did do that they could probably get disease or injured or something like this. So this is a very unwise practice and something that I would encourage people to avoid. Then if you currently are viewing pornography, or if you've ever done this in the past, you can see that this can cause complications in your life because the mind can become obsessed with this media, right? And now, if somebody goes in that direction of this pornography, oftentimes the mind gets trapped into this fantasy world of all these fantasies that are occurring in the pornography. And now, if you're coming out of that, if you're starting to work your way out of that addiction, you might find that it's very challenging to connect with an actual live partner because you've been so involved in looking at pornography and indulging in sexual activity through the pornography and maybe with some masturbation, that now when you're choosing to actually have a real life partner, it becomes challenging for you because the experiences with this real life partner can never really live up to what you saw in this fantasy world. So this is something to consider, that if you're interested in sexual contact, that I would encourage you to go towards an actual real life partner, because that's where you're going to find the intimacy that the mind is really interested in. Whereas if you go towards pornography, you'll have a tendency to go into this fantasy world and have a really hard time coming out of it. So let me know if you guys have any questions on this particular precept. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So now we'll move on to the fourth precept. Here's the words of the Buddha on this fourth precept. He says, abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a true speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. Here, you're seeing much more illuminating language than what most people translate this as. What most people translate this as is no lying. And again, this sounds like black and white. It sounds like rules or commandments, but the Buddha is giving you much more illuminating language here to be able to help you understand the reason why it's important to not lie. Because if you've done any amount of lying, you know that people have discovered those lies, and then people don't see you as being trustworthy and dependable. So now if you're, say, in a professional environment and there's some really good quality project that's coming up, people aren't going to feel comfortable staffing you on that project because of your untrustworthiness. So if you are trustworthy and dependable, where people know that when you speak the truth, then you'll find that your professional career and your personal relationships will really blossom, and they'll be at ease because people can trust you, right? So you would like to always be speaking the truth. And if you think back to when maybe we were a child or we were younger, we were doing a lot of lying, you might have noticed how your mind was kind of obsessively figuring out, what did I tell one person versus what did I tell another person versus another person? So how could you ever get to the peace and the joy that is the enlightened mind if your mind is obsessively trying to figure out what you said to one person versus another? So the Buddha understood this precept so well that this other teaching that I've inserted here is actually him teaching his son, where he's sharing with his son to not lie even as a joke. And this is really helpful for you as well, that if you lie during your jokes, then people see those lies and people see you as not being trustworthy. But if you actually learn how to tell jokes that are truthful, this takes a bit more skill, a bit more wisdom, but they're oftentimes a lot funnier. And you'll notice that people find them to be more humorous. It's going to just take more work for you to be able to do that. So I would advise you to look at ways to improve the way that you're maybe joking, because sometimes not only do we tell lies in our jokes in the unenlightened state, but you might actually be degrading people and diminishing people, or you might even be degrading yourself within your own jokes. And this is really unwise. You would like to have bright and uplifting, fun and jovial jokes where you're not degrading and diminishing others, degrading or diminishing yourself, or actually lying. And this just takes some work and effort on your part, and ultimately you'll be able to get to a point where this is very easy for you and effortless for you. So let me know if you have any questions here on this particular precept. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions here. So now we go to the very last precept for today, which is, this is the words of the Buddha. He says, refraining from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. So here again, when you're studying the teachings of the Buddha and the words of the Buddha, you need to investigate them. So this word heedlessness, you might not understand what that word means, so it's important to go look it up and make sure you understand what this word means. So I looked it up for you, and here's what it says, that the word heedlessness means careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, and unmindful. So if we put substances into the body that is promoting heedlessness, which is unmindfulness or unawareness, that's taking us in the opposite direction of enlightenment. Because in order to get to enlightenment, you need to have awareness of the mind so that you can purify the mind. You can make wise decisions and you can eliminate any unwholesome qualities that are in the mind. And you can cultivate wholesome qualities. So if you don't have awareness of mind, you will have certain struggles and challenges in making these wise decisions and actually experiencing improved results in your day-to-day life. So this is what the Buddha is teaching you, is it's unwise to put substances into the body that would cause heedlessness. And he's speaking in a way that is timeless, because he couldn't imagine all the different substances that we would have created over the course of humanity's time frame. So he speaks in a way that is timeless so that you can apply this to any aspect of time. So this precept is true during the lifetime of the Buddha, it's true now, and long into the future, no matter what substances are created, this will apply then too. So you can take substances that we're aware of today and you can apply this in this situation. And again, you're going to need to be able to see that it's not black and white. So let's take something like marijuana. With marijuana, there's irrefutable evidence that there's medical benefits here with this particular plant. There's children who have had, maybe 20 seizures a day, and this is every day they're having 20 seizures, and they will get a bit of CBD oil and they will put it on the tongue of the child and they won't have another seizure for like 6 months. This is a thing that occurs, and they've done scientific research on this, and they can test this and see this. So we know that this plant has medical benefits, but there's also situations where this plant could be used for heedlessness. And this is where someone needs to figure out how are they using this plant and why. Because with marijuana, there's two different aspects of the plant. There's CBD and there's THC. If someone's going for the medical benefits, they're typically looking for a high CBD. But if they're going for the high, the heedlessness, they're looking for a high THC. And oftentimes they're ingesting it through smoking, perhaps. Whereas if you're doing it for medical benefits, usually it's ingested as an oil or an edible or something like that. So you're going to need to pay attention to how you're using this, the method of ingesting it, but particularly look at the reason. Whereas if somebody's taking marijuana because they're stressed or having anxiety, that will cover up those feelings, but it's not going to actually eliminate them. As soon as the substance is out of the body and out of the mind, they're going to be experiencing that stress and anxiety continuously, because what's causing that stress and anxiety is the craving, desire, attachment, and marijuana is not going to actually solve that. So you need to be able to look at these kinds of things and make wise decisions for yourself. We know that cigarettes don't have any medical benefits whatsoever, and more people have figured this out, and this is why we see less and less people smoking. But for a period of time, there was a lot of people in the world smoking, and that's where we saw a lot of problems with lung cancer and other cancers and things like that. You're going to need to pay attention to prescription medications, because there's some prescription medications that can actually be addictive. If you get prescribed a medicine, what I recommend that you do is you research that to be able to see if it's addictive or not. And then talk to your doctor and see if there's maybe a different medication that you could use that's not addictive. And sometimes what you might get back is, yes, that there is another medication, but in some cases there might not be one. And in that situation, what you would like to do is get rid of that medication as soon as possible. Take it for what you need and use it for the purposes that you need, but then don't allow it to linger, and get rid of that as soon as possible so that you can ensure that the body and the mind doesn't get addicted to it. You're going to need to even pay attention to things like caffeine, because this is actually a stimulant. This is an actual drug. And what you'll notice is if you take caffeine, it's going to lift the mind up, but then it'll drop back off. By the time somebody gets to enlightenment, they have natural energy, that they can sustain their energy all throughout their day, that they don't go up real high in the morning and they don't drop off in the evening. They don't get exhausted. They don't get tired. An enlightened being gets sleepy where they need to sleep, but they're not exhausted or tired. So if an individual is using caffeine because they're tired, that's going to lift them up and they're going to experience a heightened amount of energy, but then they're going to crash after that. In order to be able to get to enlightenment, you need to develop this awareness of mind, but you also need to develop this sustainable energy all throughout your day. And if you're using caffeine, it's not going to allow your mind to be able to build up that quality to have that sustainable natural energy because it's relying on the stimulant. And if you ever decide that you would like to detox from caffeine, you'll be able to see that it's a stimulant, it's a drug through the withdrawal symptoms that you're going to experience. Just like a person who's maybe addicted to heroin or cocaine is going to go through withdrawal, you'll go through withdrawal from eliminating caffeine. You'll have headaches potentially. You might have shakes in your hands. You might have a dry mouth. You might notice that you sleep a lot for a period of time, but you're going to need to go through that in order to get to the other side where you can build your natural energy. So this is something that you would like to pay attention to at some point in your journey to enlightenment. You're going to need to even pay attention to your sugar intake. If you take high amounts of sugar, you can notice that that produces a high and then there's a crashing. We usually figure that out as children and then we kind of avoid those kinds of things, but that's something for you to keep in mind for yourself, and if you have children, you can keep that in mind as well. Some people will tell you that psychedelic substances are going to help you to get to enlightenment. And this is due to a lack of wisdom that is pervasive in some communities, that people think that psychedelic substance is promoting this introspection and this inward looking ability that is somehow helping you to be able to get to enlightenment. But these substances aren't actually helping you get to enlightenment, they're actually hindering you, because you do need to have introspection and look inward to be able to get to enlightenment, and you're going to need to have that quality all throughout your day. But if you can only have introspection and look inward when you're taking a psychedelic substance, then you're not going to be able to cultivate that quality of mind all throughout your day. So if you're having a challenge with mom or you're having a challenge at work and you need to be introspective and look inward and look for an answer, you can't be like, mom, hold on a second. I need to go drop a hit of acid. And after I do that, I'm going to have the answer to what you're asking me and I'll be right back, right? You can't do that. So in order to get to enlightenment, you're going to need to be introspective all throughout your day. And that's why you would like to cultivate this quality so that it's always available for you. And you can do that through meditation and through your daily life. The way that I think about psychedelics is it's like kind of walking down the street doing window shopping, and you look in through the window and you see this beautiful handbag or this beautiful pair of shoes that you would like to really acquire, and you can see how beautiful they are and you can see how amazing they are through the window, but you can't go in and actually touch them and feel them and purchase them because you're chained down to the sidewalk outside. So this is kind of like the way psychedelic substances are, that it kind of gives you a glimpse of kind of a little bit of what it kind of looks like to be introspective and thoughtful and things like this, but you can't ever really cultivate those qualities to be beneficial for you to get to enlightenment because you're chained down by this substance. You haven't allowed the mind to cultivate those qualities on their own. So this is everything that I have to share with you on this particular topic. Unless you guys have questions, you're more than welcome to ask any and all questions by putting that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So it looks like we have some questions coming in. Let me just see where these are. Okay, this person is saying music can also be psychedelic for aerobics, good moods, or silencing internal voices. This isn't actually true. What's really happening there is the mind is having central desire, that the mind is longing, yearning through the ears in this example. And when it hears something pleasurable, the mind's getting what it wants and it moves to these conditioned pleasant feelings. So music isn't a psychedelic. It isn't actually producing the things that you're thinking about. It's actually producing, in this particular example, conditioned pleasant feelings. It doesn't have to. You can listen to music without getting conditioned pleasant feelings, but the mind needs to be trained to be able to do that. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere else. So what I'm going to do here is just end class by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for your interest in learning the teachings of the Buddha. And as you guys would like to learn, you can continue to learn in this program, because each Sunday and Wednesday we get together in order to share the teachings that's going to help you to be able to get to enlightenment. Next week on Sunday, I'm going to be in this book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment, Chapter 8. This chapter is titled Transforming the Three Poisons: craving, anger, and ignorance, this is where you're going to get a broader picture and a deeper understanding of what's actually plaguing the unenlightened mind. Because so far in this program, we've talked mostly about craving, desire, attachment, but now we're going to broaden that and we're going to deepen it and help you to understand more of what's going on in the unenlightened mind and why it experiences what it experiences. And I'm going to give you some more solutions to be able to help you to understand how to solve this. And these are actually solutions that you've already been learning, but now I'm going to show you how it all connects together. And then, of course, on Wednesday, we're in our last part of our 4-part series on Buddhist chanting. So if you'd like to learn Buddhist chanting or practice Buddhist chanting, you can come to our Wednesday class or watch the recording. And then tomorrow, which is Monday for me, Monday morning, about maybe 10 hours from now, I'm going to be starting a course called Foundation in the Path to Enlightenment. It's from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Thai time, and I'm going to be live streaming this like I do all the other classes and courses and retreats. And that's going to be Monday through Friday this week from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. So you're welcome to participate in that live through Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can watch the recordings if you like. So in a short period of time, you're going to be able to learn the foundational teachings to help you get on this path. And these are teachings that you guys have already been learning as part of this group learning program, but oftentimes it's really helpful to hear them again. So this is an opportunity for you to learn them again if you'd like to. So again, thank you all for joining, and perhaps I'll see you guys in one of these future classes. Have a very lovely and wonderful rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee Krap.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To provide support for this podcast, visit patreon.com/support Buddha. To access more teachings, visit buddhadailywisdom.com. There, you will discover a full range of courses, retreats, and online resources to assist you on the path to enlightenment. Remember to establish a daily, consistent meditation practice, along with learning and practicing these teachings. A well-developed meditation practice is the foundation in which to train the mind to attain enlightenment.